So, hello everyone. Welcome to the second presentation of the evening. Today I'm going to be doing my first talk at the Vue.js Hamburg Meetups, which I've been looking forward to quite a long time. And I brought a topic today with me that, kind of came around due to practical reasons. And I was quite excited by it, and I think that I have some really cool things to share with all of you. As a maybe quick look into the round, who has already worked on creating an AI chatbot or any kind of AI features within a Nuxt application? Oh, or maybe not a Nuxt application? Okay, so I do see quite a few hands. I recently worked on a Nuxt chatbot, as well as like some extra LLM features on the side for one of the customers at the company that I work for. And one of our main jobs was integrating data from their database and from the product that we built, and then creating and crafting cool AI features that can be used within the already existing application. So today I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that we took and also look at a small little demo app where we might also be doing our own integrations later on, depending on if everything plays along. But before we jump in too far, a bit of information about me. I'm Zoey. Hi. I have a background in sociology. I'm a full-stack developer at SideStream, which is a Cologne-based web development agency. I'm also one of the maintainers of the site-based open source project. One of our biggest Nuxt modules is the Nuxt Off module. Some of you may have used it before, and I host this meetup. If you want to connect, you can find some of my social links here on the side, but I'll also have them open again later on. Generally, also all written differently, similar to how Factorial does it. Took a page out of their book there. And I sadly could not bring my pet with me today. She is waiting at home for me to come back, but this is Mila. She, likes to sit on my computer and sometimes casually stalks me, as we can see on the right, or not on the right, can hardly see her. Anyway, let's get into the meat of the subject. So, AI is kind of cool. And building stuff with AI is a lot of fun, and I very much got lost in the process. So before we jump into it, I want to set a few ground standards and a few disclaimers on when should we even use AI in our product and how do we create good AI features that just don't exist for the sake of, oh, it's AI, we're going to put it in to do some marketing bullshit. So I have a bit of a checklist here with some do's and some don'ts on when it may be a good idea to integrate an AI feature into your app. So, as I already mentioned, the first thing, this is super important to me. Find an actual benefit and use case for integrating AI into your app. It doesn't make sense to just throw AI in there and say, oh, it's a new chatbot, or oh, you can do that, when there's no actual use case behind it. So never approach adding AI features from the perspective of, I need to create something with AI, and always look, where is a flow that I can automate and use LLMs for to actually create user value in the end? Then the second important point is you have good data available. Like I mentioned before, find a use case for your AI. In most cases, it's going to be based on what you can offer and what your product is. And in this case, that is going to be your data. If you don't have any good data to work with, people could just use ChatGPT. And there's no reason for you to integrate an LLM into your product. Then the third point, there has to be a specific tolerance for fuzzy answers. This was one point I had so many discussions with the customer where they were finding these niche edge cases and trying to trick the AI into doing something that they didn't want it to do. In our case, that was always baking a cake. So we would have these customer weeklies and they would be like, oh, the AI gave me another cake recipe. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, okay, yeah, if you try and manipulate the prompts and you keep insisting on a cake recipe, at some point it's going to cave. So having a specific tolerance for fuzzy answers is always quite important to have as well. Then the fourth point is having a flow that is safe to automate. This means that you can pass in data. That data can then be transformed and interpreted by an AI and then be returned as another form of content to the user. If you have a super important product or flow that needs to depend on things being done exactly the same time and always getting the same answers out, then AI is also not your go-to. And then the 2 points where I say that, AI is not good for is if you have a high impact decision that needs to be made, or if there's any kind of high accuracy, especially that 100% accuracy that is required. In those cases, AI should probably not be your go-to. solution for this. So now that we got the disclaimers done, let's look into how we can connect our data. When we looked into this, there were two primary options what we could do. The first option, we could train an AI model on our existing data. The second option was to use something called retrieval augmented generation and tool calling to embed our data into the AI that was already pre-trained. You can already probably figure out in this presentation I'm going to be talking about option 2 because option 1 is highly expensive, a lot of work, and super hard to get done automatically, especially if you have shifting data that the AI constantly needs to be retrained on. Option 2 is also a lot easier, a lot cheaper, and can actually be done quite easily in existing Nuxt apps. So yeah, let's look further into it. But first, what is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG? It's a cost-effective implementation for AIs to gather data and to also scale up the data load and the user load that they're working with. It allows them to access very specific domain information that may be exclusive to your app or your product. It lowers the risk of AI hallucinating, especially in the areas that your app is focused on and where you can provide a better data. It can increase user trust because you can show the direct sources that may be linked within your product or within your knowledge base. It expands the use cases from just regular ChatGPT to actually being able to interact within your application. So it, for example, can also create things for you, conduct user actions, or change the UI that the person is viewing. It gives us developers more control over the specific AI model that we're using and allows us to insert data quickly and easily. And last of all, it gives us better data security, ensuring that we know what is going in and we can more easily know what we expect would be coming out. Super important also for debugging purposes, trying to figure out what did the AI do in the background. If you just send it off to ChatGPT, you have no idea which source it may have cascaded from, what training data this was exactly used on, because it's just such a big amalgamation of different data. And if you provide your own data into it, you can see exactly what did the AI search for, what information did it get, and how did it get to its logical answer in the end. So that's RAG. We're going to have a quick look now at how RAG actually works. So I drew up a small little diagram on the right side, and I have the steps for it on the left side, but we're going to walk through at one step at a time. So the big circle that we have in the middle with the user is the user's computer, or the client that is making the requests. On the top, we then have our data. This could be a database, it could be PDFs, it could be a knowledge base, whatever we want. And on the bottom, we have the LLM. So step 1 would be that the client makes a request. So basically, number 1 would be the user is inputting a question or a prompt and about something that they would want to have. Okay, my arrow is a bit wrong, but in the second step, the information model would then figure out what data would I want to request from the data sources that are provided to me. This is something that you as a developer can control, and you can tell the AI, in addition to your current knowledge, you have the possibility to call this function with these parameters, and you will get this output of data that you can expect back. So step 2 would be that the model figures out, okay, what information do I need to better answer this specific question? For this, it looks at the tools at its exposure, selects which tool it wants to use, and then makes a specific query or call to that tool to retrieve the data it requires. Then this tool can return the data back to the AI. And what happens in this step is that this new data is added to the prompt of the user to enhance the question with more context and answers that can already be pre-provided to the AI. The AI then uses the question of the user, the new data it has retrieved via the tool call, and its existing data to produce a better output back to the user in the end. So in the sense, it's not one single step anymore, but it's a multi-step process in which an AI can request information from one or even multiple tools to perfectly come up with the best possible answer it can come up in that moment. So we're going to jump into some code in a second. But to make everything a bit easier for us to understand and to generally make it easier to switch AI models, I'm going to be using a SDK from Vercel called Vercel AI. under the hood, what this basically does is it offers a unified abstraction and a framework with which you can call all sorts of different LLMs. There are packages for OpenAI, for Gemini, and all the other LLMs. But if you ever want to switch the AI model, it's a lot of work to migrate from their framework or their library to a different library. This is why we have this Vercel AI SDK, which under the hood just provides a unified application layer that we can interact with. And if we then ever want to switch out our model, we can easily do that without being vendor locked into their specific implementation of JavaScript as well. Also added a quick QR code if anyone wants to scan it. Actually quite nice to work with. So now we're going to do something that people always tell me don't do, and that's a live demo. And in this case, it's probably going to be even worse because it's a live demo that involves AI. In this case, I have a small little demo app that I set up this afternoon, actually, that is set up with a simple Nuxt 4 app with the mentioned Vercel AI SDK, and also a few other packages that make styling a bit easier, and in general, just our life a bit better. So the AI SDK consists of two important parts that we will look at. We have the backend server route, and then we have the front end that can make calls to this backend. So we see these two places, one right here, and the other inside of these two pages here. In the end, this backend route is very familiar to most people. In the end, it's a lazy event handler, which returns an event handler, which then has these pre-made functions from the Vercel SDK, which allows us to A, stream text from the AI, and then B, return that from the API in a better readable state that the front end can handle it in the next step. When we then go into the front end, in the most simple and easy way, we have this chat element right here. And this chat element contains everything that we need to interact with our backend API. In the end, our server API route is set as a default, but we can also configure this in here. And what these two elements allow us to do is to easily connect the front-end application and the backend to really make the setup quite a breeze to get working. In this case, we can see that this chat element has two important areas that we're using. The first is a function that we use up here to send a new message from the user. And the second is down here, where we access the messages that have already been sent. If we jump into this application now, we can see a very bare bones chat app, but we already have our first input field at the top left. And if I write hello in here, we will hopefully now get an answer from the AI. In this case in German, so I could ask it, let's speak in English. And we can see that I can easily submit my answers, and we then get the streamed result from the AI. This page isn't great to look at, so I did do some pre-work already and just styled it a little bit with the new Nuxt UI V4 Alpha that came out this week. Very much can recommend checking this out as well. Ever since the purchase of Nuxt by Vercel, the entire Nuxt UI 4 will also be free to use and contains some amazing elements, especially in the direction of AI elements, which I'm using here. So we can see, once again, if I write hello here, we get the same functionality with just a bit of a nicer UI in the background. So if we go to this chat page here, we can see that we're using the same chat class up here, and we're sending the messages, and then we're just passing the chat.messages over to this uChat messages component from Nuxt UI, which is already compatible and made for Vercel AI SDK. Another positive reason to use these packages, as they make working with it super, super easy. But at the moment, we only have a very simple AI implementation that basically is just ChatGPT in itself and doesn't contain anything specific to our Nuxt application. So what we're going to do now is go into the backend handler and begin looking at this specific section right here. This is where we can add tool calls that allow our AI to request data from news sources. I created a super simple demo tool right here called Get Weather by Location. Inside of this tool call, you provide a description, which is basically telling the AI when to use this specific tool. In this case, my description is super simple, but in our more advanced use cases, this description could be multiple paragraphs where we give exact parameters of when what is needed and when to call this specific function. Afterwards, you have an input schema. Here you can pass a Zod schema. Zod is a further validation library that allows you to define types within TypeScript or JavaScript with some more additional information than base TypeScript types would allow. In this case, you can see that our input schema is an object with one value called location, which is a string. And we then use the .describe to provide additional information to the AI on what this field specifically could be. In this case, it's quite simple. It's just the location to get the weather for. But if you have more advanced input schemas, you can be very specific here on what you would expect. And if you use different types here, the AI also automatically understands what input is required and can kind of retrieve it from the user answer to a certain degree. Then, last but not least, we have our execute function down here. And this is what is then called with the input of the user. The input is automatically typed and retrieved from the input schema. You then have access to this and can then do a function call here. In this case, we're just getting a fake temperature and returning this back to the AI. So how does this now exactly work? If we go back to our app and we hit some of our very specific keywords in this tool call, we will then be able to trigger this specific tool call and ensure that it actually generates a new temperature, which it would give back to us. So in this case, I would ask the AI, what is the weather like in Hamburg? In the background, the AI now can identify that we're asking for the weather and can then make a tool call to this specific tool that I had just given it to return us a fake temperature reading. I mean, I think we would all wish that it would still be this warm in summer, but I don't think this is the case. So that's kind of making me sad now. Well, anyway, that's how the tool call is working. Obviously, this is a super simple case of this specific tool call, but some of you could maybe already have some ideas on how easy this would be to integrate with, say, your ORM database, or make a fetch request to an external backend where you could then access your knowledge base. The cool thing about this is it integrates super nicely with other services and systems you may have already built. As an example, in our other knowledge base, we already had a search functionality via an API. So in this case, we could tell the AI how to structure the search queries, could send that to that specific API, and would then return back the information. So far everything has been going well. So now I'm going to take a bit of a risk, and we're going to do a bit of live coding to create another tool that we can also use. And I thought that a good idea for this would be to use the GitHub API to allow the AI to request information about specific GitHub repositories. So I have no idea if this is actually fully going to work, but I would say let's give it a quick try and see if everything goes well. So I already picked out this specific URL and this API that we can use. When we go back to our tool calls, we will now begin by creating a new tool. In this case, I would call it get repository by org and name. We can then call the tool function from Vercel SDK and can provide a description for it. Retrieve information about a specific GitHub repository by its organization and name. We can then define an input schema, which in our case would be an object, and we would expect a org. And we can add a description here, the GitHub organization or user that has the repository. And then we can have the name, which would be the name of the repository. Okay, always love spelling in these cases. Then we're going to go into our execute function. And in this case, I'm just going to access the org and the name. And we're then going to just very simply return the fetch request to this specific API. And then we're going to replace the Nuxt with the org and the name. So in this case, we would now be making the request, and we would then return this JSON output that we also saw in our browser back to the AI. In theory, we could also provide more information inside of the description or inside of the output on what every single field means inside of the JSON response. But in this case, I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to let the AI interpret what it means. In most cases, if you're working with a JSON-based API, the AI can already gain a lot of information from the keys of the specific values. And especially in the case of a product like GitHub, the likelihood that the AI has seen these terms before is quite high. However, if you're working with a white label product or something that the AI may not be trained on, this is all information that you can enhance within the prompts that you send it. Okay, so to kind of just also do a bit of debugging, I'm going to do a quick console log here of the org and the name, so we can also see what is happening in the background when we make this request. I'm returning the fetch here. So yeah, it's basically getting resolved by itself. But yeah, if I were to await this and would want to reformat the data myself, then yeah, would be needed. So anybody have a repository or project that I should search for? Faker.js. Please give me some information about the GitHub repository. What is the org and name?
Faker-js and Faker.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. Oh, so it is giving us some information. We can see in our console logs, it did properly identify the org and the name, and it made the request to the backend. Yeah, I'm currently not using any kind of markdown formatter here, but it's expecting a markdown formatter, which is why it's all formatted a little bit weird. But we can see that it has gotten most of the information that would be interesting to us. Yeah, I don't really know if everything is correct, but maybe looking in your direction, Christopher, does it look generally okay?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Not sure about the stars.
Okay, how many stars does it have? In this case, we can now continue the conversation, and because it has access to the previous messages and the previous tour calls, it can keep gathering information that it may have also not said the first time.
Does it also follow all the links? So can you ask, for example, who's one of the core maintainers?
So actually super interesting that you mention it. By default, the model that I'm using right now, which is a GPT-4o Mini, does not feature web scraping possibilities, but we can make a tool for that. And in theory, what we could do is make a tool that's, for example, get website HTML by URL, and we could then allow the AI to request the HTML of any website it would want to look at. And then this could allow the AI to search for specifically that information about yourself, for example. But yeah, I mean, we can look through here right now. Like, I know that there is quite a lot of more information about it. I mean, oh, look, this is so nice. It's public and actively maintained. But if we, for example, also look at other information here, we could easily connect it up to be more and more advanced. So we see we have a lot of different URLs here. So in theory, we could expand the tool even more to allow it to request different APIs or different URLs. You could, in theory, make a tool for every single different URL API that you want to request. However, generally that's advised against, because if the AI has access to more than 6 to 7 tools, it starts getting more confused than anything else. So in that case, it's often recommended, and from my experience, it has also been better to basically add another type variable here, for example, in which you would then say, for example, what information would you like to request. So you could say like stars, for example, or other information that you could then request via that specific API call, which you handle down here instead of your execute function. So that went quite well, but I do have some edge cases and tests that I was already thinking of that I did want to try out. And this is kind of now going also into the part of debugging, because this specific case worked very well. But I also gave it exactly the information that it requested and would need. But in most cases, when someone is chatting, we may not even write that it's a GitHub repository. So as an example, now I'm testing the AI. How many stars does @nuxt/nuxt have? This question now is a lot less exact than the one that we just asked. First of all, we're not mentioning GitHub or repository. And second of all, we're even including the @ in front of the org name. So in this case, let's see. Oh, so it did actually manage to figure out that this is the formatted GitHub repository, and it also removed the @ sign. Consider me impressed in this case, actually. I was not expecting that to work. But I think this is exactly the trial and error that you're going to run into with AI, where you keep finding out new extensions and then keep trying to improve it more and more and more. In this case, with GitHub, it worked quite well. I can already, yeah, 1 second. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you check if the number of stars is what you see in the API as well? Just to see if it knows it by the API or
Sure.
pre-trained data?
So we're currently here at 58.1, 58.1. Yeah. And I think it should pretty much also be exactly this number here from Stargazer count. So, yeah, if I...
Lost 1 star on the way.
Yes, yeah, here, no. Someone has starred Nuxt ever since we started speaking. Yeah, so that seems to be working quite well. But like I was saying, in this case, GitHub, yeah, very well-known source. High likelihood that the AI generally knows, yeah, what the terminology is and how it works. One specific example I can give where I had a lot of struggles with this formatting of the search query was in the product that I was building, where we had to deal with laws, specifically German laws. And the AI had a lot more issues properly pulling the article and the law number from the question that the user was asking. Because very often they would either add the paragraph sign or they would just, not even include the correct law number or article, because it could be something like BGB AT, Artikel 5, Paragraph 6, and try and have the AI properly determine the parts of that specific phrase and then make a query for that. We had a great API that would let us request the laws and get their full text for the AI, but it was really struggling with figuring out how to compose the question and the query to get the data it required. So that is where we have this description on 1, the tool set, and then 2, the model itself, the schema itself, to properly evaluate what data is given. So yeah, that brings me to the end of the one tool call that I was working on. There are a lot of things that in theory we could still do, and there's so many possibilities that we have within this Vercel SDK kit. As an example, we also have the temperature up here that we can use to control how creative it gets. We could even hook into different lifecycle parts of the specific requests. For example, if we wanted to save the chat and the messages to a database or stream them from a database, it gives us the possibility for users to upload files or for us to also upload and access files in the backend via tool calls. In a different flow I implemented for a tool, the AI could request a certain document from our internal knowledge base, and these were all PDFs, and it would then actually return the PDF to the AI, and it would then be able to use this PDF to properly give answers and also cite on which page and where it got the information from. Another very cool thing that we can do is we can actually access the data of the tool calls in the front end. For this, I'm going to quickly jump back to this index page here that we have right here, because if we look a bit closer into the message object that we have, we can see that a message always has the base information, such as the role, so who was saying it, it has its own unique ID, and a few other information parts that are good to have, but it also contains an array of parts. And these parts are basically the steps that were taken to come up with this specific message. So in this case, we can see here that we're basically conditionally only rendering the text output of a specific AI. However, if we, for example, add a pre-tag here, we then have the possibility to print out way more information about it. So as you can kind of see on a base level, we have these different types of part types that can be sent along. Step start is the initial, step 2 in my diagram back then, basically the deciding step of the AI, which tool it wants to use. We then have the possibility to access the information from a specific tool call, and we would then expect it to give us a text in the end. There are a few other types here that we don't have to concern ourselves with right now. Reasoning, for example, is for all of the newer reasoning models that have like these sub-steps where they like think about the answer and kind of come up with like more information about it. All not necessary at this moment. So let's really just focus on these pure first parts. And this is now also what I meant with it's great for debugging, because if we go back into our raw input and I ask again, how many stars does at Nuxt/Nuxt have, we can see that here we have my question that I just sent the AI. We can then see that the AI starts a step. This is when it's basically deciding what tool do I want to use. We can then see that it makes the tool call to the tool get repository by organ name. We can also see what its input was, in this case Nuxt and Nuxt, and we can then here see the output that this tool call gave back to the AI. In this case, this is also where we would then know where it got its information from. For example, the amount of stars it has at the moment, so right here. And we can then, at the very bottom, see that the AI then returns the text, which it has now created based off of the tool call above. And that's how we would then see it. I think this becomes a lot more interesting when you also have multi-step processes. I'm going to try and fake one. So if I ask, for example, how many stars does Nuxt/Nuxt have, and what is the weather in Hamburg? Oh, yeah. The AI will. The AI can handle it. I'm sure it can do that. So we can see step 1, it gets the repository in org by name. And then in theory, I would expect down here, it then to also afterwards call the get weather by location, and it then returns Hamburg. Oh, 10 degrees. This is already a lot more accurate. See, the AI is getting better. I mean, this is a very forced example. You would never ask what the weather is like and how many stars there are. But I mean, in a more practical example, we could ask, please compare the stars of at Faker.js /Faker, right? And Nuxt/Nuxt. And now the AI would hopefully get the star counts of both repositories and then compare the two and give us that response back. So in this case, it is hopefully getting data and then doing a next step with the data to basically do this comparison. Yeah, so we can see it got the Faker data, it got the Nuxt data, and now hopefully it says here, here's a comparison, and now it actively compares the two different packages and gives us information back. And this also now goes to show how it can go from just pure information retrieval to also doing analysis with the tools that you provided to it. And I mean, in our case, this was super simple now. Obviously, the AI from GitHub is already existent, so the heavy work has been done here before. But the same goes for a lot of the apps that we're working in, especially in enterprise applications. Most of the applications that I work on already have these API tools and calls that we can make to a database or to specific data. And then integrating these AI tools now to actually bring real value to customers is something that's relatively easy to do, in my opinion. And that also kind of brings me to my conclusion. Test this out, have some fun with it, and see if you have any cool ideas on where you could actually incorporate this into private projects of yours or also projects at your company. I can tell you from my experience at least, my CEOs love whenever I come with new ideas for AI tools, especially in the products of the customers we're developing. It's a great area to be in. It's super modern and super on the front. And us developers will look at this and be like, oh, it's not that difficult to actually implement, but for our end users, this is going to blow their mind, and it's absolutely amazing. And the possibilities really do get endless at some point, as long as you let your creativity run free. So to give you a bit of a starting point there, please load. There we go, back in here. I open sourced, or I published the code that we were just looking at. So if anyone wants to have a look at this code, feel free to scan that QR code. I also just realized I didn't make the repository public yet. I love how that, like, in this specific moment then also comes to mind. So I will be making this public in a bit. I'll also be posting the slides and the repository on my website. So feel free to have a look at that afterwards as well if you're interested in it. Yeah, and then have some fun with that. Okay, I'm going to do the publishing in a bit. So that was my presentation. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, anything we can run through again together?
I'm running.
Yes, in the back.
Actually, 2 questions. First of all, thanks for the talk. And can you make tools that access the data from another tool? So if, for example, if you want to make the comparison strict on the stars level and have a Boolean output or something, can you access this directly?
So yes, you could. It is a bit more complex and a lot more difficult than we just saw at this specific moment. I think in most cases it would be better to have a flow that could be self-contained in that sense, because you never know if the AI is really going to choose both of the tools to execute and in what specific order. However, there are basically hooks that you can go into on a much lower level of the Vercel AI SDK to control what the previous data was, what the next data was, and to also maybe enrich or change it afterwards. I know that the Vercel AI SDK, they have a playbook on this specific use case actually. There is one use case where I think this actually makes a lot of sense, which is when you actually want to request data from the user, for example. And that's also where I saw this specific cookbook from them, where the user could ask a question, the AI would then take this question and then format more follow-up questions to kind of kickstart this back and forth stream with the specific user, or maybe also to request permissions from, for example, the browser. Because that's also a possibility with the Vercel AI SDK, that we could, inside of the weather thing, for example, have it that the AI can also request to access your browser location, and you would then get the pop-up in your browser. So multi-step tools and these processes are possible, a bit more complex and highly depend on the use case, I would say.
My second question, do you have experience of when you don't want to use one of the big LLM models, but for example, as you presented in the beginning, have a personal rack that you want to access and then use the Vercel SDK?
So I mean, with the rack, that's more of a principle on how to embed data. In our case, we only used like half of the entire reg architecture and model in the end. Normally, you would also create embeddings into the AI itself so it can re-access the data that you got from previous tool calls. The embedding is a bit more flaky, especially on like the not big providers, because yeah, embeddings in general are another whole different topic. And I know OpenAI has them, Gemini and Claude, I think, also have them. But I would say in general, for most use cases, having an external knowledge base that just gets re-requested while not being cached and not directly being built in is normally fine in my opinion. I don't know if that fully answers the question.
Yeah, I was more on the side, how do you explain to the SDK that it should access your personal URL? For example, we have a provider that gives us the access to a rack. They use an LLM that gives you a summary of the response from the rack. We couldn't use the SDK because we couldn't adapt to it and had to build it ourselves. And yeah, that was a bit unnecessary at this point.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in theory it would be possible, but I think it would be more work just because it's a custom solution that you then also have to customize once again. I mean, if I quickly go back to my code, in the end, you pass this model function here, and this model, very similar to the tool calls, is an abstraction layer. And in this case, create OpenAI here is one of their predefined functions for this. And I'm sure that if you dig into this model tool calling or create your own model, you would then be able to set the specific URLs and also your model and how to properly access it. However, I think, once again, very use case dependent, but I think they would be able to give you the flexibility for it. But it then obviously takes away this easeability of use that I was especially talking about, where you can retrieve a lot of the value, because at that point, it's a whole nother can of worms. Cool. Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, basically from your experience, regarding improving the results, like how often it actually responds properly. Is it better to just widen the context for each tool or maybe parameter, or you'd create a structure where, for example, I would think like a separate tool that would act specifically if AI doesn't understand what happens, and then you create it, okay, if it contains German language, maybe it's German low. If not, then use a different tool. So kind of create a more structure of tools.
So yeah, you actually can. And the Vercel AI SDK also has a function that you can pass, which is basically for the tool selection. By default, they have a few different preset functions or behavior systems. For example, you could say you always have to use at least one tool. You could say use at max this many tools and at minimum this one. You could also write your own custom tool handling function, where you could basically, in a sense, like overwrite or add additional context on top of the AI selection of the tool, where you could specifically say, try and use this tool if you can. If you can't use that one, use this one. And if you can't use that one, use this one as a fallback. That is possible. And they have a section in their docs called tool selection for this specific process. Can also be simple, can also be super complicated, very much depending on your use case. But yes, you have a specific amount of control over this. Not full control, because the AI still makes the decision itself, but it gives you the tools to impact its decision.
Great. And maybe one small question, basically, since you mentioned that you kind of encourage this CEO's behavior, how do your colleagues react? Do they happy that you take all the flame, or you get the fire?
So, I mean, for the most part, my colleagues are also quite excited actually by it. The one thing that I heard quite a lot from people is, you do the UI, where I said, like, sure, that works for me. In a sense, like for one product, I now built our chat UI. It's so easy to copy and paste into other systems. I mean, we had a look at the Nuxt UI, which is also one of the reasons why I specifically wanted to use it, because it goes to show how easy the UI aspect of it is as well. And the new Nuxt UI has so many different ways of displaying the messages. If it's in a full page, if it's inside of a pop-up, doesn't really matter in the end. But aside from that, I think most of my colleagues, as long as we stick with this tool embedding, are also quite motivated and excited by it, because it is actually a lot of fun to just play around with it and try things out. And like, if I'm honest, like from a developer's perspective, it was the first time in a long time that I had this aha moment again, where I was like, that is so cool. That is so fun to work with. And it's doing something with my data and it's converting it. So it really kind of took me back to learning a brand new technology and getting those aha moments.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the talk. So you mentioned that we can use 6 to 7 tools at a time. More than this is then they get confused. So what's the basis there? So why it get confused? What's the reason there?
So 6 to 7 tools is not a hard limit. It's very much a recommendation. You can add however many you want. The problem in general is that the more options you give the AI, the more it starts to also question its specific decision in that case. I mean, we saw in our example, we have descriptions here, and at the moment when it's trying to make the tool call, it's going only through these 2 specific descriptions. If you're at some point at a point where you have, let's say, 10 or 15 tool calls, before it can make the decision, it has to read through every single description, go through every input, and figure out if this is the ideal one. And the more tool calls that you have, the less exact the AI can be, and the less confident it is in its decision to use that specific tool. So in general, that's why the recommendation is to have very specific tools, that the AI can easily identify when it needs to be used. And then once that flow has already been started, then you can handle it yourself in follow-up steps by, for example, using this type parameter. So in my example here, if we were to use a GitHub tool, I would probably make a GitHub API tool and say anytime you need information about something from GitHub, use this tool call. And then inside of this, I would probably do a disseminated union based on the type, where the AI could then, for example, pass as a type either the user or a repository. And then based off of that, it would have different input parameters. Because step one for the tool decision-making process is always the description. Once the description is hit, it then understands the input schema and can then continue working based off that.
Yeah, thank you. But when we saw the console log that we saw the step-by-step, it depends on the context that you are giving, because it was asking only for the weather when you are asking only specifically about weather. But when you combined both of them, then it asked it went through all the tools. So is not it isolated, and why the AI, so this should go to all the tools that I don't get?
So in general, I think it's more the second part that I was talking about, the similarity of tools and then being unsure which tool exactly to use in the end for each specific use case. I can't fully tell you what the AI is doing in the background or what it's thinking. I'm not an AI engineer and would never claim to be one. This is all primarily just based off my own experience and what I've encountered so far. And in general, I noticed the more tools I had, the less good quality responses I was getting from the AI. These were some of the reasons that Vercel also listed in their AI docs, primarily this just too much information and kind of getting overwhelmed and making it easier for the AI itself to follow specific steps and flows. But in the end, my recommendation would really be try it out, code, see what works best, change some things around, and then check again if it's better. And it's super hard to properly test or quantify in the end. So yeah, really just take a crack at it and see what works in the end.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay.
So right now we are coding everything here in English. Is the AI smart enough if you ask in a fresh session, for example, wie ist das Wetter in Hamburg?
Yeah.
So there's no keywords crossover anymore, but is it smart enough to just trigger the location call?
I mean, let's try it out.
Okay.
I mean, I am very much confident that it is smart enough for this, as the entire app that I was referring to before that we're making for the client, all the content and the users speak German, but the prompts are all in English and it works without problems.
Don't make it too easy.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean,
Also translates the
Yeah.
names.
yeah. Yeah, so seemed to work. Yes, indeed. But that's kind of also what I meant with the AI. It really does feel like black magic sometimes, and it can work, it cannot work, which is why I highly recommend plan out your demos to customers. Like I actually, in my notes before demoing something, write down very specific questions, and like I'm not copy and pasting them over to make it look natural, but I'm just like, okay, let me think about it. Let's try out this, and like typing and copying while I'm looking, just to kind of get the most level of security that you can have in the end.
Funny part now, it was the correct temperature.
Oh. Random chance, or is the AI smart enough? So yeah,
No console log in the temperature.
that's true.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. How would you test or write tests for this kind of app? So it's not very deterministic, and customers always also like tests and code coverage, whatever. So how would you write or recommend writing tests for this?
So when it comes to testing the specific functionality for specific queries, I mean, you could in theory do it. It would cost quite a lot of OpenAI tokens. So I don't think any kind of automated testing where you actually send the response to the AI makes sense in this case. Also because I don't think it makes sense to have automated tests when the questions and prompts are never going to be the same from the users. I think that there may be value in having very specific questions that you may want to ask. For example, if you don't want it to talk about one specific topic, you could have an automated test that basically just sends a question to OpenAI via their API to ensure that your prompts and everything still work and block it correctly. But I think aside from that, there's no real automated testing you can do. Like I mentioned before as well, it's a lot of work with gut feeling and improving the responses. So in our case, a lot of testing from our PM side and also from the customer side, just chatting. We gave the customer the option to fully download that same log that we were just also looking at, where we would see what the AI did in the background. And they prepared like docs on docs on docs for us, where they were like documenting issues they had and then including this like detailed chat log. And we would then go through and kind of see like which prompts needed adjusting, which tool calls weren't weren't properly working. But sadly, just due to the fuzzy nature and the unpredictability, I don't have a good testing setup at the moment that I would recommend. Maybe someone else has one. So if someone has an idea for this, feel free to share.
Yeah. There is in the Open AI API some evils. And these evils are just made for that, to see that when you, for example, change the model, that you get the same good answers. And for the switching from 4 to 5, there are some bad answers as well.
Yeah, super cool. I didn't know that. Maybe a question from my side then to you. This evaluation, is it like matching the string exactly, or how does it kind of determine if the prompt or the model change didn't impact the behavior too much? Do you know?
No, I didn't test it in a way. What I think it's not exactly, but there is this, how to say, this guard who decided if it's the same or not. So he interpreted it also, but you can steer it like this temperature, how far it can go away, I guess.
So we're back at AI validating and testing AI.
Yeah. That's also a very strange thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sounds super interesting. I'll definitely have a look into it.
Another question, so when it's an operation and you want to have some control over it, even the users enter something and something get wrong or so, are there tools to maintain that, to have some control, to get these cases and to debug?
So what we do on our end is we save all of the chat logs anonymously into our database. I mean, that's what I was also referring to. They have hooks where you can basically hook into before and after messages to save them inside of a database and properly look at them. I mean, therefore, you could, in theory, already do an evaluation based off that. But if you have massive amounts of chats and messages, obviously, it's going to be hard to pinpoint where issues came from. Within the tool calls and the prompts, you could, so one example I could think of, if you have a tool that's quite important, or if you have, let's say our tool call here for the GitHub API. If the AI requests a GitHub org and repository that doesn't exist, the API would say doesn't exist, and then in theory we could log like an error or something and be like, the AI thought this was a GitHub repository, or the user entered a GitHub repository that doesn't exist, and we couldn't find anything. Then you could log that specific instance. In general, giving incorrect answers, I mean, quite hard to define what incorrect is. Therefore, I think that, logging the places where you know things could go wrong, basically like normally in applications, is a good step. And then providing users the option to give feedback is the other important part. So in general, for also the product we built with the customer, it's labeled as like in development and beta and like your early testers and everything. And the user has an option to like quickly click on a button and say like, this doesn't look correct. And then it's like, just set a Boolean on our backend basically for that specific message of the AI, which then just gets, more highlighted and we can then have a look at it and see why the user reported it. I think those are currently our strategies.
Yeah, I can support that. That's exactly the same we are doing. Collect direct user feedback and then evaluate. This whole LLM is evaluating output is a whole rabbit hole in itself
Yeah.
where you can spend a lot of time in it.
It's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also something why I asked for the stars previously. LLMs tend to want to please you a bit and answer your question no matter what.
Yeah.
And so they try to take data from that training and use that for an answer instead of what you gave them as a context. One other question I had, the tools look kind of what MCP promised to provide, this protocol from
Yeah.
Anthropic, I think it is. Do you have compared that? This looks like a more front-end developer-friendly approach than MCP because that is like server structure and stuff. But in what it provides, did you do some comparison there?
So I didn't do a comparison directly for it. I've also not worked with MCP directly yet before. I'm probably falling into exactly the camp you're talking about, making it easier for us front-end developers. So I can't specifically answer that in this case. I think the main reasons why I went with Vercel's AI SDK was this tight-knit integration between front-end and back-end. Because when we sold this feature to the customer, we also didn't do a proper estimation, I would say, to the point where I would say fully building this connection and the APIs for everything would have been, in German we would say sportlich. We basically, I did the estimation based on this Vercel AI SDK where I knew that most of the heavy lifting would be taken over for us and we could focus the majority of the time on creating the tools and then engineering the prompts. So, yeah. So I'm also looking at the time, and I think that I'm slowly going to wrap it up. However, I'll be here for a bit longer, so feel free to talk more about AI with me. I think it's super interesting, and I have a lot of fun. Before we jump out, though, I do have a few other conference announcements and also one additional raffle that we are going to do in a bit. But I would say let's do a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll meet back at 9:10. And then we'll do the final raffle and then head off into our evening. Thank you, everyone, and see you in 5 minutes.